Hi class. I chose to do my presentation for my case study on the Okanagan complex wildfires from Washington State back in 2015. The reason I chose to do this case study was primarily because I myself was born and raised in Washington, lived there for about 25 years, and never realized how many wildfires occur in the state and the complex issues that happen thereafter. So for my table of contents, I've broken it down into 10 categories. One being event description, two, key players and participants in the event, three, ICS roles played, four, missing ICS roles, five, personal assessment of public health response, six, personal assessment of the ICS structure, seven, evaluation of community preparedness, eight, discussion of changes to management and systems, nine, application of changes to management and systems, and 10, with references. So a little bit about the actual incident. It occurred back in 2015 between August and September as things lingered into September. And the area is actually the central Washington area where the mountains typically are. So Western Washington and Eastern Washington are separated by the mountains and have drastically different landscapes. And with that said, this fire was actually the worst for all of Washington State in history. Destroying about 300,000 acres and taken 3 lives away from firefighters. It was quite the disaster. This slide right here discusses a little bit about some sources didn't know the cause of the accident. However, many and experts are saying that it started with lightning strikes. And then this graph right here kind of shows what areas where the fire occurred, and realizing that at this point in time, it was 3 different sections. However, by the end, it'll be 5 different sections. So let's go on. This is a photo. Okay, so key players and participants in the event. Based on the National Incident Management Situation Report, there was a total of 8 crews, 19 engines, 2 helicopters. With that said, there was about 1,200 firefighters involved, 700 National Guard troops. On the right side, you can see bolded are the 3 firefighters who lost their lives. They were injured in a car crash that exploded. And alongside, we'll get into the next section. So the ICS roles played. We have over here the cooperatives include Washington State, Department of Natural Resources, Okanagan National Forest, Spokane District BLML, Colville Agency, Okanagan Fire Districts 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 16, the Concoli Fire Department, and we have 3 incident commanders, which can be a good representation of how big this issue was. Originally, they started with 1 incident commander, and as time went on and the fire started progressing and magnifying, they ended up having to have 3 and then split them up in different groups. So let's keep going. But some of the things that I noticed that were missing for the ICS roles is under the commander staff, the information officers role seemed to be missing. The reason I led to this conclusion was based on my resources, journals, and articles. It seemed as if the information was all varying. I wouldn't say necessarily significantly, but the numbers of acres destroyed varied by about 100,000, the amount of homes destroyed, the amount of individuals involved. So I felt like the best resource was actually using the National Incident Report. So with that said, I also feel like we're missing some of the finance and administrative staff, revealing that the fact that this cost $62,500,000 was spent on this wildfire complex. And the reason I feel that the finance and administrative staff, I wouldn't necessarily say missing, but there was some key information that was missing in regards to, we were given this number, very large number, however, the resources and the way that it was broken down was never revealed. So maybe by having a little bit more of a thorough financial analysis might be helpful for the public and for future references. This is an interesting fact. Did you know in fiscal year 2015, the Forest Service spent approximately 52% of its budget on preparedness programs, which is about $5.1 billion. Here's the photo. Okay, so for my personal assessment of public health response, using the emergency support function 8, I realized that the communication amongst the federal, state, and local levels was great. People met up together, had, scheduled meetings, and came up with strategies and a plan of action. However, the main thing that was lacking was just resources, whether that is funding, manpower, and sometimes just strategies. However, I think as the impact of the situation, they realized that they tried to do the best that they could and responded, and based on the actual magnified situation and the disaster presented to them, they did a pretty good job at responding and given their resources. So one thing that I thought was interesting was if you look at the Washington Interagency Incident Management Team and their numbers right here, it shows the different fires and how much was contained. So we see that 9 Mile Fire had 90% contained, whereas Beaver Lake Fire had 0% contained. So this really just shows that for all the working parts that were going on with this wildfire complex, that there were different teams being separated and divided, but still they didn't have enough in the end. So based on what they have and on their resources, I feel like the public health response was to the best of their ability. Maybe the one suggestion that I would make is just having more of a plan, or since there's a history of wildfires in the area, to know like, okay, what can we learn from, like the past 5 years or the last year's wildfires? And that might just be an assessment of like the landscape and educating the public. But it seems as if that's already been well known because there were volunteer firefighters, there were people within the community helping out with the public health response as well. Okay. And in regards to the ICS structure, it seemed as if they attempted to, like work with among the different levels in the hierarchy, whether that's the incident commander, the general staff, et cetera. And everything trickled down and then were split and divided. So I felt like that might have actually been the best way to navigate around this, because if they worked all the teams together, they might have actually not had enough resources to pay attention to all the different fires that were going around in the different areas and regions that were spreading. Okay, this right here is just a map of the region. Okay, so an evaluation of community preparedness. I felt like with the communication, that was pretty much on point. Everyone agreed and they came to solutions. I never read anything where there was disputes amongst the different teams that were working together. I felt, like I mentioned earlier, that one of the major weaknesses, though, was just not having the resources needed and available. And another weakness might actually also be just understanding like the landscape and realizing that this particular area tends to be dry, rural, and flatlands, allowing for the winds to pick up. And in this case, with the lightning, they did the best that they could. Okay, so a discussion of changes to management and systems. One of the biggest things that I'd like to just bring up is thinking about how we pay for wildfires. This was a reoccurring issue in a lot of the articles that I read, and actually discovered that Congress from 2015 had proposed and then got approved the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act in 2015, where in short, federal disaster money can actually be spent on wildfires, just like we do for tornadoes and hurricanes, especially with the increase of wildfires that we're seeing all around the nation these days. And another change that I would talk about is just prevention work. And this is where public health response kind of comes into play. But if we know that there's a history of wildfires in these areas, how can we better prepare and prevent them from occurring? Whether that means watering crops or whether that means having community engagement activities where people can come up with ideas that can best suit their community and how to bypass these problems from ever existing. Also, just looking at evidence-based literature. This right here is a graph that just shows that to the right, it shows the wildfires and the demand increasing from 1995 to 2015. Okay, and then application, once again, just one of the main solutions, just like Vilsack said at the bottom, any solution must confront both parts of the funding quandary. It must limit or reverse the runaway growth of fire programs as a percent of the Forest Service's annual appropriated budget, and it must address the compounding disruption of fire transfers. One of the main suggestions is just learning from past wildfires beyond just that region and having experts come up with best plans of action. And then making sure that that information is communicated to other teams, communities, and within the community. And for that, there's references. I've used 8 different references, found that it was actually really interesting. Once again, like I mentioned earlier, that some of the information varied amongst my sources. So that's it. Thanks so much.